Table for One, episode 14. This week it's Pandemic. Hey everybody, welcome back to Table for One. This is episode 14, and this week we're going to be looking at all things pandemic. This is, once again, Anthony, and we have Jason here.
Yo, peoples, what's up?
We're back this week. In advance, if you're listening to this as it comes out, happy holidays, and hopefully you have a good week ahead and a happy new year. And to kind of roll into that, we wanted to talk about probably the most popular co-op game ever, which also happens to be a great solo experience. That's Pandemic. But not just Pandemic, all things Pandemic. So we're going to be diving into base game Pandemic, 3 expansions, Pandemic Cthulhu, Pandemic Iberia, the whole 9 yards, all the stuff that you can play, what each of them offers from a solo perspective, and give you some thoughts on all that.
Yes, let's do it. If we have time, we could hit the dice game, but I think you'll get enough game experience out of the Pandemic universe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much out there now. I think we talked about this last week or the week before. This is now a game. It's more than just a game. It's an ecosystem. It's becoming a munchkin. We get a new version of Pandemic every 6 months now. So it's interesting because it's co-op and we can play it solo, which is fun.
Yeah, and you notice we didn't mention Legacy. I think we're going to save that for the next episode.
Yeah, that's a different beast. Same game idea, but obviously a very different experience. So we'll dive into that totally separately next week.
All right, Anthony, tell me how to play Pandemic.
Oh, man.
I've never heard of this game. I don't know how to play.
This is your character, guy who's never heard of Pandemic. This is actually funny because I had to teach this maybe a month or two ago, and I realized I haven't taught this game in several years. Usually when you sit down to play Pandemic, everybody knows how to play, or I'm playing by myself. So I was like, I gotta remember how to play, what all the rules here are. But it's Pandemic. If you've played any version, you know the base rules. If you've never played it, you've probably seen it played. The basic idea is very simple. You have a map of the world, and you have 4 diseases that are infecting all these different cities around the world. Each player is going to play a character with a special power, and on your turn, you're going to get 4 actions, which will allow you to do things like move, treat diseases, pass cards between each other, build research stations, and ultimately try to cure and eradicate the disease. The game ends in victory only if you cure all 4 diseases, and it ends in a loss if any number of other things happens. If you run out of cards, if you run out of cubes for one of the diseases, if you hit 8 outbreaks, and an outbreak happens when too many cubes land on one city, more than 3, and then spread to the cities around it. So that's Pandemic in a nutshell. It takes about an hour. You work together cooperatively, trying to basically manage the board and keep it from exploding on you, while you are also treating and curing diseases. And all the other stuff on top of Pandemic will tweak, add to, adjust, make different. There's all these different things you can do to this base formula. But that's the base formula. That's what Matt Leacock produced in 2008 that we are still playing today.
And I think that when Pandemic first came out, people were, pretty excited. Wow, cooperative game that isn't like for kids. This is a real step forward with the cooperative genre. It deserves all the accolades. But if you were a Pandemic player at the first, before any of the expansions hit, it got a rap for being very solvable. Like you're gonna, you kind of get a sense for when to do what, when to hit your cure button, when to go out and treat diseases. And it was really, like a puzzle, and then you could solve the puzzle. So if you wanted to wrinkle it up a little bit, then you need at least one of the expansions. And I know Anthony hasn't played all the expansions. Someone slaps on the table, you're going to play some of them. But I'm going to run through really quickly all the expansions, and then we can kind of talk about that base experience as a whole. So the first expansion is On the Brink. On the Brink just adds more stuff, first of all, which the best expansions make sure you get that extra content. more characters, an extra epidemic card so you can play really, really, they call it legendary, a really hard version of the game. More pawns, blah, blah, blah. More events. But what On the Brink did to mix up that puzzle formula was two things. First of all, they added a mode called the purple cube. It's not called the purple cube. I think that's I forgot exactly what the purple cube thing is. Mutation challenge. There you go. I'm scrolling to it right now. It adds a mutation, a fifth disease that acts differently, comes out different cards, make it spread out so it's a lot more unpredictable. Really added a lot to the game. It also came out with these virulent strain epidemic cards. They're alternate epidemic cards that each do something nasty each time an epidemic card hits. So all of a sudden the disease is harder to treat. Outbreaks are worse. You can't move out of an area without treating a disease. Really wrinkles up the game. I'd say probably on that short list of essential expansions, right up there with the expansion to Kingsburg, to Forge a Realm, or the expansion to Machikoro, maybe. People who still play Machikoro, I don't know if people even play that game anymore. Really, but essential. Like, you have to have it in there. Just, it mixes up gameplay enough to really give it some spice. I'm actually going to talk about the last expansion next, because it's most similar to On the Brink. It's called State of Emergency. The reason for that is the expansion I'm going to talk about last really changes the whole game. Pandemic State of Emergency just adds more stuff. So if you like Pandemic and you just want more stuff for it, there you go. So State of Emergency adds really different gameplay. It adds the Hinterlands challenge, which is these sideboards, and the sideboards have these alternate sources of disease, which are represented by animals, and you have to cure those in a different way, and they interact with the board, create different paths for interacting, where it's not just the same board. You're kind of going off the board and then on and off again. So more spaces. It adds emergency events, which are basically just epidemic cards, but they happen at different intervals. So you're always getting something bad happening. If you're any Pandemic fan, something bad's always happening anyway. Like, oh my God, something's happening. These emergency event cards just amp that up a bit. And then the last one is it's called a Superbug challenge. The Superbug challenge is these really hard to treat disease, and they introduce a different mechanic. People who've played it know about the Tic Tacs. The Tic Tacs are these special little things that you could use to treat the Superbug, and it creates so much more time pressure on you to play that challenge. I've actually got a chance to play it with Z Garcia, which was a real bucket list gamer thing of mine, and we lost. We thought we won, and then we realized we lost. So that's just the way a lot of these games go. But we would have kicked the game's butt if we didn't have that extra wrinkle, that extra challenge in there. There are more game modes I'm skipping, but there are game modes that are not applicable to solo. So like there's a terrorist challenge and team games and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to talk about those. I don't know if you've played with those, Anthony, but I think we could safely skip those.
Yeah, I haven't played with the terrorist. I know we joke about it a lot, but we haven't actually played with it.
Yeah, it's like, if you're going to play Pandemic, let's just sit there and play it.
Yeah.
And there's better trader games, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. So the last expansion I'm going to talk about is In the Lab. In the Lab, when it first came out, I think it just really hit like, wow, this is amazing, because it adds a module that adds so much theme. It's a separate lab board, and instead of just taking cards and declaring that you have a cure, it simulates taking a sample of a disease, processing it, multiplying it, combining it in these different cards, and then these cards represent like gene sequencing. The card, this virus has to be in a certain way, and then when you fill the card with cubes that are taken from the board, processed to this sideboard, then that's how you get your disease. There's a couple things. One, it adds tremendous theme. Two, it loosens up the trading. So trading, people complain about trading. It's so hard to trade. You have to be in the same city, all that kind of stuff. Here, like a lot of those cards, they can just play it on this lab board, and anybody can do them. So it frees up the game in a certain way. Really, really changes it up. As a solo, man, that is I love playing with in the lab. In the lab expansion also has an official solo mode. No good. I love Pandemic. Full disclosure, it is my number one game of all time. Gave it a 10 on VGG. I give very few games a 10. This solo mode, though, it's not good. It's basically just like this automation with a bunch of set rules or a bunch of extra actions that you can do, but it has its own hand. And if you're going to play a game with its own hand, then might as well just play two-handed and play two characters and whatever. So you're getting in the lab for more stuff, for an extra. It actually also has an extra mutation challenge, which is great. But you're really getting it for the lab challenge, and to really, really wrinkle up the gameplay. So that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of options available for the solo gamer. On the Brink is necessary. In the lab is good. It's really good if you want to change that gameplay up. I wouldn't say it's necessary, though. And a state of emergency adds more stuff. So how much experience do you have with all the different modes?
Bits and pieces of pretty much everything. I think anytime I play it out of the house, On the Brink is in there. Play with the mutations, handful of times as well. I actually only own the base game, and I do own a couple of other versions of Pandemic, but I don't have any of the expansions just because it's not something I play that often. But that said, the lab board from In the Lab, really everything In the Lab adds, very much enjoy that. I've played with that a few times, with a group of people, but I've not played with it solo, so I can't speak to that as well. But based on what it adds and kind of the dynamic nature of that expansion, I can see that being, highly recommended.
So how do you enjoy this game as a solo? Does it hit the table very often? How do you treat
it? It doesn't too much, and it's not a ding against Pandemic. I think part of it is just I don't own some of the stuff that would add that variability to it. Like you said, it's a puzzle. I've played base Pandemic maybe 3 or 4 times solo, and I'd like it for a couple of reasons. One, it's really quick. If you're playing by yourself, you can finish a game in like 30 minutes. And two, sometimes just solving a puzzle is fun. And when I'm in that mindset, I'll usually turn to one of my co-op games. I'm not a big co-op gamer in general, and when I play solo games, I don't tend to lean that way. But I do like what Pandemic offers. The way I've played it the most is usually either with my wife or with my son helping, which is 80% solo. He's only 5. But, we do work together to kind of figure out what our moves are going to be. So, yeah, I enjoy it a lot. It doesn't come out too much. It's been on my list for a long time to get at least those first 2 expansions to build it out a little bit. So it probably would hit the table more. But to date, that really hasn't happened.
So in a way, the thing that makes it so expandable, which we're going to talk about some of these variants in a second. So people who have been playing Vandam for a long time, hold on a second. We're going to hit the newer stuff in a bit. So the thing that allows all these expansions to hit is the fact that it's so bare bones, which straight up, like straight Pandemic is so simple. It's just you're going around and you're basically playing 2 games at once. You're treating these diseases and you're set collecting. You're building your hand and you're using the hand to do stuff, but mostly you're just collecting the set so you can cure it. So you're kind of balancing, and it creates that tension. So that basic tension is there and really nothing else. So yeah, like a simple game like that is going to generate a puzzle. But the benefit is it's so expandable. These modules, they all fit. I wouldn't recommend playing a bunch of them together. Like you get 2 or 3 modules together at the same time, then you're just asking for trouble. Maybe you like trouble. Who knows? Some people just love losing their faces, and I've done that. Like I used to shuffle in 3 or 4 challenges plus in the lab, and it didn't work out great for me. But there's just the fact that, so in a way, like the thing that, you know, people kind of complain, oh, it's so abstract and so, like, you know, kind of dry, at least the basic version of it. The answer is yes. But there's enough gameplay there where it's like it appeals on the cooperative level, and the fact that it's so simple lets it be so expandable. And I really have to admire that. I really love Pandemic because of these. Like, I don't treat the extra expansions as an extra thing. I think it's just a part of the deal, you know? You get these expansions. On the Brink is necessary. Pandemic plus On the Brink is my favorite way.
Yeah, the thing about Pandemic that I've always found fascinating is that it's a complete game, obviously. It feels like a complete game, but it really almost feels like a framework, you know, like someone's written an engine for games. And it's almost surprising to me that it's taken as long as it has for other designers to start taking that engine and applying it to new forms of play, because it really lends itself to that really well. Heck, we have, how many games do we have out there that are basically Pandemic reskins by other designers, you know, like Defenders of the Realm, or it's, the system works really well. The ideas behind it work really well. And you can do so much cool stuff with it, which we'll get into. But I'm excited to see how much more cool stuff can be done with it. You know, it's not like a Munchkin where you're really getting the same game every time with a couple tweaks. You can really adjust this system, and it works really well. The base game is still fun. I still like it. It's a nice little puzzle, but it's all the stuff you can layer on top of it that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So speaking of layering on top of it, Anthony and I have played the 2 recent expansions that came, recent variants, I guess, that came out this year. So Anthony, hit us up with some Spanish Pandemic. How'd that go?
Yeah. So Pandemic Iberia. This is the, I'm going to say limited edition because Z-Man insists on saying limited edition, but they printed 55,000 copies, which in the land of board games is a ton of copies. In the land of Pandemic, maybe not so much, but if you want a copy, there will be plenty for a while. But they are only printing this game once, and it is, based on Matt Leacock's design, but it is a new design. So it's taking those mechanics and kind of tweaking it a little bit. Now, the game itself is pretty much Pandemic. The first time I sat down to play it, the person who had brought the copy just basically laid it out and said, these 5 things are different. Didn't actually bother going through the rules. We all knew Pandemic. And so that's what you're getting. But the really, really cool thing here, and the thing that I love about this, it's one of my favorite versions of Pandemic thus far, is that it adds theme to a game that is otherwise rather themeless. You are in 19th century Iberian Peninsula, so Portugal and Spain, and you are one of many different roles. So you have, the town doctor, you have the local governor, you have a nurse, and you are moving between all these cities, very much like Pandemic. They are all linked together by these lines, all within one landmass, though, so there's no crossing of water or flying, because this is before airplanes were invented. And you are trying to treat diseases. You can't cure anything, because this is before we could cure any of these diseases. The other cool thing is all the diseases are named, because these are things that people actually had to deal with back then. So you have typhoid and malaria, and there's visual imagery that goes with each disease, and thematically you're basically trying to contain it and treat it and make people feel better, not necessarily cure it, because you can't. Other stuff changed in the game. You can purify water as an action, which basically creates a safe space. So between each of these connections, there's going to be an enclosed space. If you're in one of those cities, you can purify water as an action. You place 2 water tokens down. The next time you would place a cube on any of those cities, you take off the water token instead. So it's a great way to basically save a space, keep it from going over and outbreaking, so you can move over and do something else. There are rails. As an action, you can put down rails. These allow you to move around the board a little quicker, because you cannot fly. If you're on a rail line, everything connected by that rail line is one movement. So you can get across the map very quickly this way. Alternatively, if you're on a harbor, which is anything along the sea, you can move to another harbor if you have the appropriate card. So that's more like flying in the base game. And then, really, really cool, it just comes in the base game, there are several difficulty modifiers. So there's one for each of the diseases that makes it a little bit harder. There's some hospital placement rule tweaks. There's some epidemic card tweaks you can make. And then when you take your cards to start the game, you get your 2 starting cards, you get to choose where you start. So unlike base Pandemic, where everybody starts in Atlanta, you're going to get to choose from one of 2 locations. So everybody's kind of already spread out on the board. I like it a lot. It adds a decent amount of variability. So it's like taking a base Pandemic, not throwing new modules on it, but adjusting it in certain ways that make it replayable and variable in a way that the original isn't by itself. The roles are pretty cool. They add some cool stuff that you can do. The nurse in particular is extremely powerful. Basically, wherever she is, she puts down a permanent purify water marker in a space of her choice. And the production is just beautiful. The artwork here is great. You have this old-timey looking map, all these great tokens. The disease tokens are little microscopes. The card artwork is great. Even the locations, there's like this little things that you wouldn't think of, but they put like the founding date of those cities, which is actually how you determine who goes first. It doesn't change a ton about the Pandemic formula already, but it adds history, theme, and just enough tweaks and adjustments that you don't have to pour expansions on top of it. You can just play this as is. And I've played it now a couple times with other people and a few times by myself, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So Pandemic Iberia, I think, is, if you like Pandemic already, you should probably track a copy down. It won't be available forever. And if you have not played Pandemic yet and are just looking to get one of all these things we're talking about, this is probably the best standalone piece you can pick up, where you don't have to get the base and an expansion.
I cannot wait to play this game. My cool stuff order got held up. Damn you, Z-Man! Not really. I had an order with Nautilion, which I guess we'll talk about in a future cast. And Nautilion is not available on Cool Stuff Fit, even though it came out on December 5th everywhere else. And I just said, screw it, give me Pandemics, and just canceled Nautilion, bought out my FLGS, and I have it coming soon. So I can't wait to play this. But what I did play was Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu. So this came out a little bit earlier in the year, and there are not 55,000 copies of this. There are more, because it's Cthulhu, and people buy Cthulhu. So, again, it's Pandemic. But the way the presentation is much different. And that's probably the most different thing that's going on with this game. This game really is, it gives you, that Cthulhu kind of flavor, that Cthulhu theme. The board is dark, and it has that gothic kind of edge to it. Everything is green and brown and yellow and whatever it is. Those like really the colors that shout. I'm in the 1910s and I'm in the 1920s. The pieces, the disease cubes aren't disease cubes; they're cultists. So the cultists are running over the land, and instead of the wrinkle that they added, that I think is probably the most interesting, is instead of the disease blowing up when there's 3 cultists in a land, they summon a Shoggoth, which is this little nasty-looking mini creature, which will go towards one of the gates and the cities. There's different locations in the city. Each color area has a gate. The Shoggoth will slowly go towards the gate, and if the Shoggoth reaches the gate, he advances the disease, the epidemics. So it gives you an extra time pressure to, actually, when the Shoggoth appears, which is that really cool moment. Everybody's like, all right, we gotta go get that thing. Unless you have the Hunter, I think the class is the Hunter, just could obliterate the Shoggoth. Otherwise, it takes a long time, and people got to really react to it. But that's cool. Very different. It's not setting the world on fire, but it adds enough of a wrinkle where it kind of changes up your gameplay a little bit. The epidemics, it's represented by these old ones. So if you remember the Virulent Strain challenge that I mentioned on the Brink, it's basically that. It's basically epidemic cards, but the epidemic cards have changed the rule a little bit, so it'll make it harder to get around. It'll, make the cultists a little bit harder to deal with, blah, blah, So that comes baked into the basic game. The other thing that is fairly cool and thematic, I guess, it adds a sanity dice when you do certain things. When you travel by gate, for instance, you have to roll a sanity. You roll on the sanity dice, and you can lose sanity, and your character can change powers. If he goes insane, he becomes a little bit less effective. So I like that. That is pretty neat. The fact that your character can change, I think this is the only official version of Pandemic where the character is actually there's a reason to get invested in them. Again, accepting Legacy, that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, so you're invested a little bit more in your character, and it has this cool insanity mechanic. The quote unquote diseases, the cultists act a little bit differently. There's enough difference in here to justify this being a separate purchase. Do I love it? Love might be a strong word. Pandemic is my favorite game, but there are a couple of drawbacks in this one. First of all, the city cards. In the other Pandemics, the city cards actually relate to each individual city. In this game, they relate to the 4 areas. So like Dunwich and Arkham, it'd be the same thing as in the regular Pandemic. The card said red zone, yellow zone. And it's like, oh, come on, man. You just give me 12 copies of the same card. Give me a little bit of, like change it up over here. That was a little bit disappointing. That's a nitpick. I guess the bigger issue I have is that there's a lot of these Arkham games. I play Eldritch Horror. I love Eldritch Horror. Arkham Horror is kind of the granddaddy of that type of game. Is this better than those? No. Those games are really good. They do very similar things to, running around the land and, knocking off cultists, knocking off monsters, and going insane. Is this better than Eldritch Horror? It's shorter. This game plays in about 45 minutes. Probably plays shorter than actual Pandemic, so that has that going for it. But if I'm gonna play Pandemic, I'm more likely to play base Pandemic with an expansion. If I want to play Cthulhu, I'm more likely to play an Eldritch Horror type game. But that doesn't mean this is bad in any way. Like if people who are fans of Cthulhu, fans of Pandemic, this is a solid implementation which adds enough difference to make it stand out a bit.
Yeah, it always seemed to me like a kind of a narrow audience. I'm sure it's sold really well just based on what it is, but like you said, if you really like Pandemic, there's probably better versions of Pandemic. If you really like Cthulhu, there's definitely better Cthulhu games. Although I can see the argument for it's a short Cthulhu game because most of them are not. But I don't know. I haven't had a chance to play it, so I don't have an opinion on this one way or the other. It's not something I'm super excited about necessarily, but it is one that it looks interesting, and I've heard decent things from people who both like and dislike Cthulhu games. So it's definitely on my list to give it a go.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before. And this is I guess maybe a little bit, we can end with a little bit of a question, zooming out. That Pandemic, it supports that. Like the fact that you can turn it into a Cthulhu game, you can turn it into an Iberia game, kind of speaks to this game's greatest strength and greatest weakness at the same time, which is the fact that it's the basic is use the word framework, right? It's a framework of a game along with being a game itself. So, I guess we could just kind of ask the question: is this an essential game? Should anybody who even throws a sniff in the general direction of cooperative games, is this a game that you should own? Is this a must-own essential game?
Yeah, I mean, I think a year ago I would have said no. And the reason for that being that if you buy Pandemic, you kind of have to buy at least 1, possibly 2 expansions. And while it's a great game, I think there's a lot of really good cooperative games out there that you can buy standalone. And I'm not saying that those are better, but it didn't have that place, at least not on my shelf. Had a copy. I always had a copy lying around, but I never really played it. Now I would say there's enough different options out there, different versions of Pandemic that really kind of hit all these different points, and they're probably going to continue doing this, that Yeah, why not? I mean, pick up one that fits your style of gaming and your group, and if you can pick up one copy of Pandemic and that can be your version that you like and your group likes, then you definitely should have that in your collection. It's just hard to recommend if you have to say, all right, Pandemic's great, but you have to buy it with this and this and this, and not really this, but probably this. It's a tough sell, I think, and I think a lot of people have hit that point. I don't think it's at all earned. A lot of people treat it the same way they treat Catan, where like, oh, it's been done better and it's moved on and gaming's advanced. I don't think that's the case at all. It's still one of the best co-op experiences out there. It's just its own formula has evolved. So, look at that if you're looking at picking it up.
That's a great comparison to Catan. Like when I was first getting into board gaming, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a short list of games that I quote unquote had to buy. Catan was one of them, and I've yet to play my copy of Catan. And it was just sitting there, and I just had no desire to play. There's other games that are just, filled that niche. In terms of a cooperative level, I had, Forbidden Island. Forbidden Island it's another in this family, like it's a totally different theme. We didn't mention it, but it's using that same engine. It's actually made that engine a little bit simpler, because it takes it takes the cards and it takes these tiles that you have to turn around. You have to cure anything. You just have to, find treasure. But that's another iteration of it. I could have just been happy with that, but there was something about the actual experience of Pandemic itself that really just said, you know what? Like, it took a while for me to come around to like say, okay, this is my favorite game. Because of the, the abstractness of it. It's like, is this? Yeah. The more I played it, the more they iterated on it, the more I, and I played the app. I must have hundreds of plays on the app. It's so fast just to load up a game, play it for a half hour and whatever. It just kind of grew on me, and I just kind of turned around. It's like, I want to play this game more than any other game in my collection. So in this way, it kind of bit me in the butt a little bit, as opposed to just blowing me away with its excellence. And it sticks out compared to a game like Catan, which kind of fell off for me. And people still play Catan, clearly. I mean, still a bestseller. But I'm gonna put Pandemic. I really am comfortable putting Pandemic up with those, like the Carcassones, the I guess Sushi Go, or whatever iteration of draft the game you want to put on there. I think it does belong in that kind of pantheon of essential games. Really do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think at this point, if you're going to own a co-op and you don't know where to start, this is the place to start. And it will remain so for as long as it takes for people to stop making games that are basically Pandemic clones. It's going to be the one.
Okay, so at this point, we're gonna talk about a little bit of Legacy, but let's wait till next episode. So sorry, guys, gotta stay tuned.
It's our first cliffhanger. How appropriate with Legacy coming up. That's great. So that's everything for this week, guys. We're gonna kind of carry this conversation over to next week. A holiday special, a two-parter, if you will. We're going to talk about Pandemic Legacy and kind of how that formula has evolved in the age of legacy games and storytelling in board games. But for now, that's going to be everything for this episode. Make sure you check us out on BoardGamersAnonymous.com. You can listen to all our episodes there. We're also on Board Game Geek, all episodes being posted into the guild now. That's Guild 1735. I post to Twitter every day, Facebook every day. So if you have any questions or just want to chime in on the question of the day or throw your thoughts out there about whatever we've been playing lately, definitely hop on over there and do that. We love your feedback. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play and give us a rating and a quick comment. We love your feedback, but it also helps more people find the podcast, which is always awesome. But until next week and our conversation about Pandemic Legacy, that's going to be everything. And we'll save you a seat at this table for one.
See you next week, everybody.